The history of architecture in New York. New York City's architectural history is a dynamic narrative shaped by waves of immigration, economic booms and busts, technological innovation, and evolving aesthetics. From the colonial Dutch roots of the 17th century to today's cutting-edge skyscrapers, New York stands as a living museum of architectural evolution. Its skyline, neighborhoods, and landmark structures reveal the city's constant reinvention and reflect broader social, political, and economic forces. Colonial foundations, 1600s, 1700s. The architectural history of New York begins with the Dutch settlement of New Amsterdam in the early 1600s. Buildings during this period were simple, often made of wood with gabled roofs, small windows, and modest facades. Dutch colonial architecture was characterized by gambrel roofs and overhanging eaves. Few structures from this time survive, but the urban plan of Lower Manhattan still reflects its colonial roots with narrow, winding streets. As the British took over in 1664, English colonial architecture began to dominate, with Georgian-style buildings emerging by the 18th century. The Georgian style featured symmetry, brick construction, and classical details. One of the few surviving examples is St. Paul's Chapel, 1766, notable for its Georgian detailing and importance in early American religious life. Federal and Greek Revival, late 1700s, mid-1800s. After American independence, architecture took on a new symbolic importance. The Federal style dominated the early 19th century, reflecting ideals of democracy and reason. It featured balanced proportions, elliptical windows, and decorative motifs like swags and urns. By the 1830s and 1840s, the Greek Revival movement swept across New York, drawing inspiration from ancient Greek temples, appropriate for a young republic seeking links to democratic ideals. Notable examples include the Merchants Exchange Building, 1836, and the columned Custom House at Bowling Green. The rise of the brownstone and cast iron districts, mid-1800s. The mid-19th century saw a surge in population and urban growth. The Italianate and Greek Revival styles were adopted in residential architecture, especially in the form of brownstone row houses in neighborhoods like Harlem, Brooklyn Heights, and the Upper West Side. In the commercial districts, particularly Soho, cast iron architecture became prevalent. Thanks to mass production and modular design, cast iron allowed for ornate facades and large windows ideal for retail spaces. Architects like James Bogardus championed this innovative material. Today, Soho's cast iron buildings remain a globally unique architectural ensemble. Beaux-Arts, Gilded Age grandeur, late 1800s, early 1900s. The late 19th century marked New York's emergence as a financial and cultural capital. Inspired by the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the Beaux-Arts style became synonymous with power and opulence. Grand buildings were erected with monumental facades, elaborate stone carvings, and classical detailing. Famous Beaux-Arts landmarks include New York Public Library Main Branch, 1911, by Carrere and Hastings. Grand Central Terminal, 1913. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's facade, 1902. This was also the era of mansions along Fifth Avenue, palatial hotels, and the early headquarters of banks and trusts that formed the economic elite of the Gilded Age. The birth of the skyscraper, 1890s, 1930s. New York revolutionized urban architecture with the invention of the skyscraper. Enabled by steel frame construction, elevators, and modern plumbing, buildings began to rise ever higher. Early skyscrapers like the Flatiron Building, 1902, designed by Daniel Burnham, and the Woolworth Building, 1913, designed by Cass Gilbert, combined Gothic detailing with the emerging scale of vertical architecture. The Art Deco period, spanning the 1920s to 1930s, left perhaps the most iconic imprint on the skyline. Characterized by setbacks, stylized ornamentation, and geometric designs, notable examples include Chrysler Building, 1930, by William Van Allen. Empire State Building, 1931, by Shreve, Lamb and Harmon. Rockefeller Center, 1930s, a sprawling Art Deco complex that became the cultural heart of Midtown Manhattan. These towers symbolized optimism, innovation, and the race to the sky. After World War II, New York architecture embraced international-style modernism, emphasizing function over form, simplicity, and steel and glass construction. Influenced by European émigrés like Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and Le Corbusier, corporate architecture became sleek and minimalist. Major contributions include Lever House, 1952, by SOM. Seagram Building, 1958, by Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson. Public housing projects and urban renewal schemes also took root, often replacing historic neighborhoods with monolithic towers and superblocks, most controversially under Robert Moses, who reshaped much of New York's infrastructure and housing. Disillusionment with the rigidity of modernism gave rise to postmodernism, which reintroduced ornament, symbolism, and historical references. Architects like Michael Graves and Philip Johnson reimagined the cityscape with bold forms and playful details. A notable example is the AT&T Building, 1984, now 550 Madison Avenue, designed by Johnson with a Chippendale pediment at the top, a direct critique of the formless glass boxes of modernism. Meanwhile, the adaptive reuse of industrial spaces began in earnest, especially in Soho, Tribeca, and the meatpacking district, where former warehouses became lofts, galleries, and boutiques. Rebuilding and innovation in the 21st century. The 21st century has brought both recovery and reinvention. The destruction of the Twin Towers on September 11 was a seismic moment in New York's history, leading to the creation of the World Trade Center complex, centered around One World Trade Center, 2014, by David Childs, a symbol of resilience and modern engineering. Contemporary architecture in NYC is global and experimental. Starchitects such as Zaha Hadid, Jark Ingels, and Jean Nouvel have left their marks. Via 57 West, Big Architects, a dramatic tetrahedral residential tower. The Vessel and the Shed at Hudson Yards. The High Line, a repurposed elevated rail line, sparked a renaissance of green urban design and fostered new architectural icons along its route. Preservation and challenges. Alongside innovation, New York has deepened its commitment to preservation. The Landmarks Preservation Commission, founded in 1965 following the demolition of the original Penn Station, has protected thousands of structures. Districts like Greenwich Village, Brooklyn Heights, and the Upper East Side are celebrated for their preserved architectural character. However, the city still faces tensions between development and heritage, affordability, and displacement. Skyscrapers have reached new heights. Central Park Tower and 432 Park Avenue pierce the skyline, but also fuel debate about luxury development and